Fix errors, waste, and issues in a couple of clicks. Get alerted whenever you're off track. Sign up at trueclicks.com.
Wix Studio, the platform for agencies and enterprises to manage clients and projects with max efficiency, sharing Wix's SEO tech to help you drive growth.
Yeah, a bit about me. As I said, worked with a little bit of everything with SEO, bit of tech, bit of commerce. Something I've always had a bit of trouble with is explaining what the hell rendering is, why someone should care about it, and what you can do to improve it. So I've come up with a sort of analogy to do it using IKEA Flatpack. I'm not affiliated with IKEA in any way, but I'm open to it. I'm like, anyone from IKEA here? No? Cool. Okay. Never mind. So starting off, who here has heard of rendering? Great, loads of hands. You're all going to learn great stuff from this because you're all going to know it already and you're just going to have it explained to you in a nicer way, maybe. Who here has built an IKEA Flatpack in the past? Slightly more hands, brilliant. Right, we're about 100% of the way there. I basically don't need to speak anymore. So, I'm going to go through what is rendering just for anyone who's not up to speed with it. Why is it important? How Google does rendering it. Obviously, go through my analogy as well. Which of these then works best for SEO, depending on your circumstances, depending on your setup, and then how to tell if it's working. So, firstly, starting out with what is rendering. Rendering is basically how Google builds a page, how it builds your site, takes all the data from the back end, and experiences as a human, as they put it in their guidelines. It basically has two states, and for every web page, you've got your initial HTML on the left, and then your rendered HTML on my left, or whatever. So, starting with the initial HTML, this is what you'll see in the source. If you click inspect, view source, it's essentially all the basic instructions before anything cool happens. Then you've got your rendered HTML, that's after everything's processed. Hopefully, once your scripts are run, that's what you'll end up in the inspect panel instead, when you're using Chrome. And yeah, basically give you a slightly better idea of what your page is doing. So, in terms of why it's important, so firstly, you want to look at the three phases of it. First up is crawling. So a page gets added to the crawl queue. It goes through the process, goes through the crawler, gets the start of indexing process. Next up, you've got the rendering. So that's when all the code, all your instructions, all your scripts get processed. Goes down into this render queue here and goes back into the processing part at the top. Thirdly, you got your indexing. So once all that's happened, once all that's processed, then you end up with your index page, then you end up in the index, then you're showing up in your search results. So what's all the fuss about, essentially? Google can't technically index anything if it can't render it properly. If you can't get something rendered properly on your site, if it can't get it showing up correctly, it's not going to get indexed, it's not going to get picked up, it's not going to show up in search, give you keyword rankings, links, whatever. You really need to just nail this bit down just so everything goes smoothly from then on. So how does Google actually render all of this stuff? Don't worry about this. I'm not going to go through all of it. Appreciate it's a lot of text there. You basically boil that down into three parts. First wave indexation, so that's when it processes it without all the JavaScript, without processing everything, without rendering it fully. Second wave, which is processing it with those scripts, with sort of the CSS as well. That's second processing. And then thirdly, you've got your fully indexed process then. So that's after everything's come together at the end. And that's when you're going to be fully in the index with your full page, not just anything that's added by HTML or by JavaScript. So basically, my way of breaking this down is using IKEA as a sort of analogy for it. So firstly, you've got IKEA as the server. You've got your raw materials of HTML, your screws, nails, and extra bits, all those little fuzzy bits you put on the bottom so it doesn't scratch your floor. That's your JavaScript, that's your CSS, makes it look nice, makes it slightly better. Your home is your browser, and then finally the finished bookcase is your finished page. So starting with client-side rendering, essentially you send your order for the bookcase to IKEA. The full Flatpack is sent to your house. You then have to go and put it together yourself, and then finally you can use the bookcase. So obviously the pros of this is it's very easy to implement. It's basically the standard for most sites. It's almost the sort of the default state of being. Con of this is you have to put it together yourself. Your browser has to process it. That obviously adds a lot of time can take a while to do it on your end. If there's lots of heavy JavaScript content, anything like that will impact load time, slow your page down, ruin the user experience, to put it nicely. So what you can instead do is server-side rendering. So this time you order the bookcase from IKEA, IKEA builds it for you, and then sends the incompleted bookcase for you ready to use. Essentially, yeah, it's slightly faster for you. You don't have to worry about getting the JavaScript processed because it's already done for you on the server. But it does also come with its own caveats. It's a lot of weight for your server. So if you've only got a small server, only got a small site, it's a lot of work for that to do. Takes some resource away from Google though, so can always be a benefit in that sense. Thirdly, something that gets thrown around a lot is dynamic rendering. So this is when users get a different experience to a search engine. So users might get the server-side rendering or they might get the client-side rendering. You could then give a search engine server-side rendering so it doesn't have to process any of that JavaScript, it just has the full page. However, Google has always said dynamic rendering is a workaround and not a long-term solution. So can't really say I'd recommend it at this stage, but if you needs must, it is one to look at. It does also give you alternatives as well, which I'm going to go on to next. So static rendering. Essentially, this is a slightly more advanced version of server-side rendering. So IKEA builds the bookcase for you and stores it there. So they built the static page and stored it in their server. You then order it and it's sent to you really quickly. But what you might find is that the static page that was generated won't necessarily have all your up-to-date components, won't have all your up-to-date information. Might be a little bit of wear and tear on the bookcase. Maybe the panel's the wrong color, who knows. So again, this is really good for SPAs or anything that's not going to change too much. So any evergreen content, stuff like that. It's not very SEO friendly, unfortunately, compared to sort of pure server-side rendering. And yeah, it's not as reactive as client-side or server-side rendering as well. So it could be a little bit out of date, depending on when you're generating these static pages. What you can do instead is incremental static regeneration. Yeah, getting very extending with these terms now. So IKEA builds the bookcase and stores it. You then order the bookcase again. The bookcase is sent to you really quickly. You get the bookcase, but what happens later while you're using it, they come in like, hey, we've got the updated book shelf for you here. This one's nice and new. It's not scratched or worn at all. Use this one instead. They basically will update the page as you're using it with the new parts that have been replaced as part of this generation. So that's essentially a nicer way of getting static rendering to work better for your site. Next up, we've got pre-rendering. So again, you order the bookcase from IKEA. What they basically do is send you a big pile of wood. Not really useful at the start, but you've got all the HTML, you've got the components you need there. What they then do is you can look at the wood. It looks really nice, but it's not really a bookcase, is it? IKEA then later sends on the screws, sends on the instructions, and then your browser puts it together. You can build it, essentially. Again, it's a little bit of a workaround. Does really work well for mostly static pages. So again, articles, blog posts, those sort of things that aren't really changing much. It can be really helpful for those. But if it's anything that's a bit more complex and not necessarily the best solution out there. What you can do instead, again, is progressive rehydration. So this is where you take server-side rendering, but what happens once you've sent the request and got the bookcase sent to you, you only really get the top part. So you can see a couple of the shelves, you can use part of it, but then after a little while, you can actually scroll further down the page, you get the rest of it as it goes. So this can be really, really useful for pages that have lots of content, like really, really long form pages, because you don't have to load it all at the start. But that comes with the caveat, it's not great for SEO in terms of getting everything on a page indexed at once. This is where you might want to think about serving Google a slightly different version or rendered different version compared to your user. Because again, it'll work fast for a user because they'll get the initial viewport, but they won't necessarily get the full page experience. Something I've come across recently as well is, I'm not entirely sure how well this works because I've never done it at scale, but islands rendering as well. So this is essentially the entire catalog broken into separate parts. So every module on a page broken into separate parts. You then send the order for the bookcase and they send only the exact parts for that. So none of the screws from your bookcase are used on any other bookcase or anything like that. Yeah, appreciate I'm torturing the metaphor a little bit here. But yeah, essentially You still have to put it together yourself, but you're not getting any of the unnecessary pieces. There's no spare parts, there's no unused parts. It's significantly better for sort of page speed where you've got loads of unused script previously. Instead, you'd get only the bits you need, so it should theoretically load a lot faster. So which is best? Essentially, it comes down to what you're sort of using your site for, what you're sort of trying to optimize for. As always, it depends. I've tried to sort of categorize them into SEO friendly, bad for SEO, expensive and difficult, or cheap and simple. So starting with, for a small site that's fairly static, maybe it's your personal blog, maybe it's something not too complex in that sort of sense, you're better off just going with either static regeneration or client-side rendering. Essentially, you don't want to mess around too much. You just want to have sort of a basic site up there. This is nice and simple. Google will get the majority of the information from it. You won't need to worry too much. Looking for larger sites, I would suggest generally moving away to a sort of more advanced rendering style. So incremental static regeneration, pre-render, progressive rehydration, or server-side rendering. These can be a bit more advanced. Again, they come with the added cost, the added weight on your servers. Can be difficult to implement on a existing site as well, but you do get slightly more benefit in terms of page speed, in terms of SEO friendliness, depending on which method you choose. For a new site, I would always go with most advanced sort of stuff, just because if it's a new site, you might as well start with the best stuff from the start, future-proofing and all that. So increment islands rendering, increment stack regeneration, progressive rehydration, I'd definitely recommend going for those, because you don't have any bloat from previous technology or previous lines of code, anything hard-coded like that. You don't need to worry about it because it's a completely new site. Definitely recommend that. And then finally, for sort of a blog or a news site, what you basically want to look for is pretty much anything is suitable for it, because you're not going to have loads of dynamic content. You'll just have sort of your basic articles, your links, your tags, all of those sort of things. Pretty much anything can work for that really well. I would generally tick to more this sort of area of it, just because if it's SEO friendly, it obviously makes my job a lot easier. But yeah, it really sort of depends on sort of what your client can afford, what you can afford, what's sort of feasible in terms of implementation as well. So the world's your oyster, essentially. So just finally, a couple of things of how you can test your rendering. So firstly, always check Search Console. This is generally the first place you want to go, see if anything's rendering correctly. Google's pretty good at sort of doing a live test of your page. It'll give you HTML and screenshots of the page. You can see if anything's coming up correctly. If your page is suddenly blank, then you've got problems essentially, because again, if Google can't see it, can't get indexed properly, you can't get your stuff crawled. Rich results test is also doing a pinch, particularly if you've not got Search Console access. Appreciate this is now no longer available. Not this one. Mobile users test is no longer available, so you do have to use rich results instead. But again, it will give you this sort of screenshot, HTML, more info, give you an idea of how the page is working. Screaming Frog's got loads of options as well. Obviously messing around with your JavaScript rendering, old Ajax version or text-based. And then obviously playing with the user agent as well. If you've got server-side rendering or client-side or dynamic or whatever. Loads of options to fiddle around with a Screaming Frog. And then really simple one as well. Just turn off JavaScript in Chrome. Loads of extensions for doing this. You really see sort of a difference or not, depending on what your setup is. But it can really help sort of narrow down like what sort of JavaScript or what sort of rendering you're using on your site. So that's it. Slides will be online. You saw the link at the start, but thank you very much.
Demand Sphere. Limitless visual insights from the SERPs. Unlimited dashboards and users. Easy to use and easy to scale your growth to new levels.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.